In this video about the Anatomy of SPV3, we'll be looking at the mission Halo and its sister mission, None Left Behind, which takes place later in the game after the Flood and Sentinels have been unleashed. The new extensions to the level Halo were the first ones we designed for SPV3, and went through a number of revisions, including tonal ones, that ended up being in the final product. With None Left Behind, we had to fundamentally rethink player behavior in this map, as previous vehicle sections were now made to be on foot sections, and many on-foot sections now incorporated the Wraith or Grizzly tank. The first section we designed is known as Alpha Base. Now, Alpha Base is a place that was described in the Halo book, The Flood. In the book, The Flood, the Marines take a Forerunner facility and use it as a forward base of operations to fight the Covenant. The overall premise of it is pretty simple. The Chief has to go help the Marines establish a base. The original iteration of this area was much bigger, with a base that you would actually have to go in on foot after taking out Wraiths and a Warthog. You would then have to destroy multiple anti-air Wraiths inside the base so Pelicans could come in and drop Marines off to hold the area. However, this quickly became a slog and the combat didn't make much sense. We empowered the player in a vehicle, then asked him to go on foot and do the same tasks over and over again. After the base was established, the player would head into the original end of the mission where they would rescue the Marines by the life pods. They would then return back to Alpha Base, which would be under siege by Wraiths. However, versions of this mission took nearly an hour and a half to complete. In addition, players would leave the Alpha Base area, do the original encounters, and then have to return after only about 20 or 30 minutes of gameplay. We then made several changes to the mission. The first thing we did was remove the interior part of the Alpha Base encounters and made the entire thing vehicle-focused. We also got rid of the ending section where the mission would end here, and instead incorporated that into the initial attack on Alpha Base. While the map no longer ends with an epic conclusion, it does make more sense for pacing. In an ideal world, we'd be able to edit the original geometry so Alpha Base came after you rescue the Marines from the life pods, but given the restrictions we had when editing this game, it wasn't really an option. However, we still wanted to have an epic conclusion to the Alpha Base part of the mission. Therefore, we added a new interior section in the back of the base. This helped break up the vehicle sections, and also allowed us to do a couple of tutorial areas, as well as include a stealth section. Players will observe two Phantoms that fly overhead, and deploy anti-air Wraiths in the structure above. A door then opens in the rear of the base that the Covenant pour out of. Players head through a short tunnel that leads them to a room with two Jackals with focus rifles, a Brute, and sleeping grunts. We expect most players to just start firing at everybody, but a patient player can make through the entire area without alerting any of the Covenant of their presence. After that, they head to the back of the room where there is an elevator. We intentionally left the elevator in the up position so players would have to manually call it down. The decision to leave the elevator up was for several reasons. One, we wanted players to feel this place was occupied, like the Covenant had already made it up to the top layer. We also wanted things to feel less artificial, like they were laid out for the player, and more like the player was interacting with the world. Once the player takes the elevator up top, they're greeted by an anti-air Wraith that is firing at the sky, keeping the Pelicans away. The player must clear out the Covenant in the area, and then hijack the Wraith. The rest of the area is pretty straightforward. The player waits for the Phantoms to come in, and is instructed to aim at the engine pods. This functions as our last tutorial, telling the players how to take down the Phantoms throughout the game. This is all done against the backdrop of the Halo ring soaring into the sky behind the rolling hills. Due to some of the reconfiguration of the level geometry, we needed to have a new entrance for it up in the hills, and thus needed to bridge this new area with the original Bungie BSPs. We designed the new area based on the last section of Halo where you have to find the 3 life pods. The idea was to hit all the same notes of an open-ended area where you could tackle the objectives in any order you wanted. This ended up culminating in an area that we call the Brute Prison Valley. The player enters an area with a river running through the middle and trees all around the sides. Cortana reports to the player that she's read multiple Marine IFF transponders, and the player must find the Marines in this area. Large Covenant comm towers were placed so players would know where to go look for the Marines. We did this to guide player navigation without having to resort to nav points. We found this area to be very simple, yet effective. We introduced a new type of environment to the player, being Alpine combat, while allowing the players to tackle the objectives in a non-linear fashion. This makes it a mini version of the original last half of the original mission. The last big change to the mission Halo is not in the mission Halo at all. We added a new mission called None Left Behind, where the player would return to rescue the Marines and help them get off the ring before it is destroyed. The first iteration of this mission had the player return to all the areas they had previously rescued the Marines in order to destroy Covenant cannons that were bombarding Alpha Base and stopping the Pelicans from taking off. However, this was boring, and it just felt like you were going through the same areas again, which of course you were. Instead, we opted to try something new, which was to make the player visit parts of the level that they had never actually had a need to investigate the first time around. Players land their Banshee near the foot of the river and are instantly greeted by a group of Covenant on patrol. Players must skulk in the shadows and ambush the Covenant as they come in to investigate. Players start with a very low amount of ammo, so they must scavenge the supplies laying around in order to deal with the incoming Covenant. Players will encounter several Covenant camps as they head towards the entrance to the tunnel that will lead them back to Alpha Base. However, it is blocked by a shield generator. Players are instructed to find their way to the waterfall, which consists of geometry which was unused in any encounter in the original mission. Players have two ways to get there. Players can head through a cave that had no encounters in the original mission. Alternatively, they can take a path that goes where the Marine with the sniper rifle was first encountered in the mission Halo. If the player takes this path, they will go through a Forerunner structure that was unused in the earlier mission. Ultimately, the player finds a Wraith. Originally, the player was going to find a downed Pelican with a Grizzly tank, but this was soon after changed to be a Wraith tank that they would find inside a Covenant camp. Switching to use the Wraith mortar tank was the single best thing we could have done for this mission. Crazy as it may sound, there is actually not a single dedicated Wraith section in the entire Halo franchise, and no place where the mortar is asked to be strategically used. By asking the player to use the Wraith mortar tank in the rock slide area, they are given a chance to use the unique properties of the mortar in combat. Players are able to take out targets that would not be accessible with the Grizzly tank, and they're also able to do this from behind cover in areas where they would have to expose themselves in any other type of vehicle. After using the Wraith tank to bombard the enemy position, the player must explore the rock slide to find the Covenant controls for the shields. The rock slide is an area which some players will experience combat in Halo, not one that most will. The player must then take their Wraith tank back to the main valley and work their way towards a tunnel that was previously shielded. Along the way, they will encounter Sentinel Enforcers, which introduces another interesting mechanic unique to the Wraith. The secondary turrets can be fired from range, allowing the player to deplete the Enforcer's hard light shields in the front. This will allow the player to then take out the Enforcers with one hit from the mortar. This is in contrast to the Grizzly the player will later use in the mission, as the machine gun turrets will bounce off those shields. With the Grizzly, the player must use the main cannon to disable the shields, and the machine guns to take out the Enforcer. This distinction, while inherent to the sandbox, helps break up the level and make sure it doesn't get too monotonous. I really enjoyed this entire area, as it highlights how players can interact with an environment differently just by changing elements in the sandbox. The encounter areas also feel new, mostly because they are, in that players have never had to fight enemies in these play spaces before. Biggest challenge for this section of None Left Behind was simply getting audio that would direct the player in the right places. While we had one custom voice actor for new dialogue, we also had to rely on recycled Cortana lines from other games. Trying to patch this all together was difficult, but I think we did a pretty good job in directing the players. Since release, we have not seen any players get confused on as where to go. One big challenge we did have here was lighting the area. Given Halo's ancient lighting techniques, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to light an area like this. While we are happy with the dark and creepy setting, some users have expressed frustration. As a result, we did some investigating into why different users were having different experiences and discovered a bug with our HDR system. We also took the time after launch to totally redo the light maps to make sure it works for all users. Overall, we have to say that we're happy with how these came out. Figuring out ways to do so many non-linear areas was a challenge, but it's also central to what makes Halo, Halo. And the ability to do such beautiful vistas keeps it in line with what people expect from these levels. My biggest personal problem with Halo and None Left Behind is that all the non-linear areas are connected by narrow hallways and tunnels. Were we not restricted by Bungie's original layout, I definitely would have wanted to do more natural transitions between areas, with more beautiful vistas and ways to tell story, especially if provided with a larger art team and more capable engine.